With us is Mike Rothschild. He's been on the program before. He's the author of The Storm is Upon Us, and now his newest book is out. It's called Jewish Space Lasers, The Rothschilds and 200 Years of Conspiracy Theories. His website is themikerothschild.com. Rothschild MD is his Twitter handle. And Mike, welcome back. It's great having you on the program. We should probably start out by pointing out that you are no relation to the European Rothschild family, at least no relation that you know of, that is so frequently vilified by anti-Semites around the world.
Yes, one of the perks of being a conspiracy theory journalist with the last name Rothschild is that a whole lot of people make up stories about you. When I started doing this, I would get comments like, a Rothschild writing about conspiracy theories, the Matrix must be broken. But no, I am no relation. And I talk about this in the book. You know, my dad's side of the family is from a totally different part of Germany. And one of the things that I discovered in writing this is that the Rothschilds, the Frankfurt banking Rothschilds, never emigrated to the United States. They had no real presence here. There is no American Rothschild branch of the family. So in that sense, you know, my family really were the pioneers. That's
fascinating. I am guessing that one of the things that motivated you to write this book, outside of the fact that you've been writing for a long time about conspiracy theories, your Storm is Upon Us book, you know, we talked about that before, is your last name?
Yeah, I started getting these comments, and you know, when I grew up, I grew up in the Chicago suburbs. Nobody thought we were rich. Nobody thought we had a secret castle in Vienna. That just wasn't my world. But when I started writing about this, I got all these comments, and one of the things I really wanted to do with this book is separate who is the conspiracy theory version of this family versus what is the actual family. What have they really done? You know, we find with writing about conspiracy theories that the real story, it's maybe not as salacious, but it's oftentimes much more interesting than the made-up story.
So who are the Rothschilds? Not the Mike Rothschilds, but the famous wealthy Rothschilds. Who are they? How did they achieve that level of both wealth and fame? And why have they been the targets of or infamy? Why have they been the targets of anti-Semitic attacks and in some cases just anti-rich people attacks for seemingly throughout history? From your book, it seems like a lot of this tracks back to the 17th century.
Right. So all of those things are sort of bound up together in who the Rothschilds are and how they became so wealthy so quickly. So the patriarch of the family was Mayer Amschel Rothschild. He lived in the Judengasse, the Jewish ghetto in Frankfurt. It was a very, very small, very cramped walled city with about 3,000 people. He worked as a small-time loan maker. He sold and dealt in rare coins and metals. And at one point, he became the court Jew to the Crown Prince of Hesse. It was one of the states of the Holy Roman Empire.
The court Jew?
So that term, court Jew, yes, that's a real term. It sounds awful, but it's a real term. This was essentially the private banker for royalty. So they were a Jewish member of the community who was plugged into the Jewish community, that they could borrow from other people in that community at interest. And there were prohibitions in canon law about lending at interest. So Jewish people could do that.
If I could interrupt, my understanding is that the way that Jews got into this in a big way back in the day was because there were so many restrictions on other fields that Jews could enter into. And this was one of the areas that was considered kind of low class, as it were, at the time. And so Jewish people were allowed to participate in banking and money lending. Do I have that right?
Yes. So Jews were not allowed to own land. And of course, most people then were farmers. So what Jews did was they went into the fields that they could go into. And in many cases, it was having to do with money because it was seen as low class, as not quite godly enough. There were a lot of prohibitions about lending money at interest. But at the same time, a lot of these royals, they needed money. They needed money to build their castles, to raise their armies. So when they needed that money, they went to the Jewish community, and the Jewish community would lend them money at interest. And it was a sort of a very tenuous relationship. But for a while, it worked for everyone involved.
Yeah, remarkable. And then so we have the patriarch of the family, and he was relatively uncontroversial. He was just the court Jew, the court lender. How do we get from that to ruling the world and Jewish space lasers?
So Mayer and his wife Gödel had 10 children. They had 5 sons and 5 daughters. And the 5 sons gradually went to the biggest banking capitals of Europe. His oldest son, Amschel, stayed in Frankfurt. Another son went first to Manchester, then to London. Another son went to Paris, Vienna, Naples. They took the family's growing business and money lending, and they expanded it. They got into textiles, and they got into mining, and that coincided with the Napoleonic Wars. So the Elector of Hesse, who was one of the major officials in the rapidly disintegrating Holy Roman Empire, had a huge amount of money that he needed to hide from Napoleonic forces. And it was Mayer and his son Amschel who were entrusted with hiding it. They worked out a system where they smuggled this money back and forth across the English Channel to fund the effort against Napoleon. So the Rothschilds became extremely wealthy very quickly by doing this.
Remarkable. The whole the Napoleonic Wars. The Waterloo Canard is the title of your chapter 3, the Rothschild Myth to End All Myths. Tell us about that.
Sure. So the Rothschilds were a major funder in the effort against Napoleon, and they did that through lending gold, through selling bonds, and there was starting to be a rumor that they had kind of inside knowledge of what was going on. So 30 years after the Battle of Waterloo, an accusation appears in a French pamphlet written anonymously under the name Satan. And the accusation is that Nathan Rothschild was actually at the Battle of Waterloo. And he was so close he could smell the cannon smoke. And he's seeing Napoleon's forces being routed. He gets on his horse, rides across Europe in the middle of the night, crosses a once-in-a-century Channel storm, gets to the London Stock Exchange. The other bankers see his exhausted affect. He starts dumping stocks. And suddenly the news of Napoleon's victory comes. All of these depressed stocks that Nathan has been able to buy up explode in value, and suddenly Nathan Rothschild has enough money to control the British Empire. So this is the accusation. Now, absolutely none of this is true. None of this happened, but it was a very powerful myth in the growing socialist movement that was arising around the revolutions of 1848. So very quickly, this becomes sort of the story about the Rothschilds.
That's fascinating. So you know, it kind of reminds me of, you know, who placed the puts on the U.S. airlines just 3 days before 9/11.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would be amazed if there wasn't some Mike Flynn type out there saying, "Oh yeah, it was Jews."
Yeah.
So how do we go from one guy being accused of of engaging in sketchy trading behavior, basically, to a Jewish conspiracy to run the world or rule the world?
So the idea that Nathan had made this gigantic amount of money off of the foreknowledge of Waterloo is also bound up in the idea that the French Rothschilds are building these railway lines that are cheap, and they are killing Frenchmen, and they're destroying the natural beauty of France. All of this is bound up in the socialist revolutions of 1848, which is very generally anti-wealth concentration. And it becomes a very large myth very quick that the Rothschilds have this gigantic amount of money and they're using it to influence world events. Now, of course, the Rothschilds were using their wealth to influence world events. They were making massive loans. They were acting as peacemakers to warring nations. But it wasn't this idea of puppet masters of puppet masters. It was them trying to protect their investments and also move along the needle of Jewish emancipation. So you have all of these real things that are bound up in this very fanciful, salacious story. And we've seen over and over how salacious stories can catch on in the public, and they can sell lots and lots of books very quickly.
For example?
So you have in the late 1800s, as these myths kind of cycle up and down, there's another spasm of anti-Semitism in France. It's based around the Dreyfus Affair, which is this French Jewish artillery officer is accused of selling secret documents to the Germans. It's a huge anti-Semitic upheaval in France. It spawns a book called Jewish France. It's this 1,400-page mammoth tome that is absolutely full of accusations against the Rothschilds. It sells 500,000 copies. It's the most popular book in France for a couple of years. This is a massive generator of what we would call now content. and it is monetized by these storytellers, these scam artists, to keep these notions going. And every generation adds more aspects to it. So something like Jewish France takes the Waterloo legend. They also link it to the Dreyfus Affair. They link it to machinations with the US Civil War going on. Every generation adds to this story, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Meanwhile, the Rothschilds are really not saying anything about it. They're really letting this try to take its course, but it never does. It just keeps getting bigger. Right. They're trying to keep their heads down, trying to ignore it. And of course, we've seen with conspiracy theories, that does not make them go away.